Good afternoon YouTube and welcome back to my channel. For today's video I'm going to be teaching you guys how to get the most out of your suspension setting on your mountain bike. It can seem really confusing because there's so many different styles of riding, different terrains that you'll take your mountain bike on. You know, some you need a fast rebound setting, some you need a slower rebound setting, some you want your bike to be really stiff, some even softer. It's really confusing, and in this video I'm going to teach you guys how to adjust it and the best type of setups you want to get the most out of your bike on all different types of terrain. The first thing that we are going to learn is what all the different adjustments and different dials and parts of the suspension are. Let's start with the fork that I am using. Is a Fox 36 170mm travel e-bike specific fork in this gorgeous orange colour. The first thing we need to work out is the sag, which is the amount of travel used under rider weight. That's with your gear, so if you ride with a heavy backpack on, you must have that on when you set your sag. That needs to be 15 to 20% of the travel that your forks have to offer, and it's measured with a little O-ring that is on the stanchion. The sag on your suspension is adjusted with air pressures, which you can adjust in the left stanchion of your fork. If you want the fork to be stiffer, you apply more air. If you want a softer suspension setting, then you're going to let some of that air out. And if you have no air at all, your forks will just go down to 0mm. They're not broken, they just need pumping up. The next setting we're going to be looking at is your compression, which is the dial on the right, in the right stanchion, which is next to the air one. Check your manual because every fork has a slightly different compression adjuster. The one that I have is the Grip 2 factory one. It has high speed compression and low speed compression. High speed is basically for your heavy impacts like your cases, your flat landings, anything really heavy. Low speed one is for smaller inputs such as G-outs or rider weight transfers. You adjust these according to how hard or soft you want to have your suspension set up. The final adjustment that we have on our forks is your rebound, and this is the rate at what the forks extend after a compression. The adjuster for this can be found underneath the right stanchion, and it is based on your air pressure, how much air you're running in the forks. That's it for adjustments on the front forks. We're now going to look at the rear shock, which is a Fox DPX2 with 65mm of travel. The adjustments are very similar to those on the front fork. You have your sag, which once again is adjusted by changing the air pressure. It should be 20 to 25% in the rear shock. You have your compression settings, which has 3 different settings. You've got open, medium and firm. Open is for heavy impacts and hard landings, medium is for different terrain, so like rocky and rooty things, and then firm is for climbs and smoother terrain, and then the red dial is your rebound setting. Now we are familiar with your suspension and the different types of setup and adjustments that are available, it's important to know what kind of adjustments and setup we want to make for that different style of riding. There's so many different styles of riding, and what might be perfect for one isn't going to work for another. So what I'm going to do is reel off a few different styles of riding and point you guys in a direction to what way I would set my suspension up for that specific style. It's really important with suspension to remember that it's a constant compromise. When you adjust something to fix one area, it's going to have an effect on another area. Here are the factors that will be affected from setup to setup. The first style of riding we're going to be looking at is downhill, so bumpy, rough terrain, most likely very low grip. So that means that what we need to do is soften the bike up, because this will not only make the bumps smoother, but it will also give us an increase in grip. However, your power, pump and reaction is compromised because the bike is so soft. All the inputs and movements that you're doing on the bike are being sucked up and taken out by the suspension, making it more difficult to ride in those areas. The second style of riding is a complete contrast to the first. It's riding things like pump tracks, doing manuals, bunny hops, all them sort of tricks. For this you require the bike to be a lot stiffer, meaning that your power, pump and reaction is much greater. It gives you better feel. It means that every movement you make is very direct to the ground and the bike isn't swallowing up all of your movements. However, what this does is it compromises your grip and your smoothness. If you tried riding a pump track with a downhill setting, then the suspension would swallow everything up and it'd be a lot of effort. If you tried riding downhill with a pump track setting, the bike would be mega stiff, you'd have no grip and it'd be super bumpy. Third style of riding is jumping. For this I would really recommend having a stiffer setup. What this achieves is more control and more feeling through the bike, which I think is important when riding a lip, especially if it's steep. With full suspension in the lip, if it's soft, the bike's going to compress a lot, which means that you're more likely to G out, and then when it unloads it could catapult you over the bars. A slow rebound is really important, otherwise this catapulting effect is exaggerated even more. You just get much more feeling and control and pump with a stiffer bike, and I think for jumping those things are very important. The other thing we need to look at is obviously softening it up enough if the landings are very flat, because you would like that to absorb the landing and not make it too heavy. Final discipline that we're going to be covering is climbing and pedaling on the flat ground. I personally would run the suspension setting as stiff as it will go. If you run it like the downhill bike, nice and soft, when you pedal you're going to lose all your power and all your energy is going to be drained out by the suspension, meaning that you're putting double the effort in for absolutely no reason. The other reason that you'd run it stiff is because the bike is way more manoeuvrable, and if you're climbing and have to make quick changes of directions or quick movements with stiffer suspension, this is much easier. The downside to running the suspension stiff is that you might encounter grip issues such as wheel spin. However, I personally wouldn't adjust the suspension to correct this. I would try to find more grip by adjusting your tyre pressures. Remember, suspension is a personal preference. It's what you want to feel and get back from the bike. What I've told you there is only a guideline, but let's go find a base setting for your suspension and play with your bike. Base setting is very important to find for your suspension, because what it gives you is a base to work from, and then from there you can fine tune your suspension to suit and perform best in the disciplines that we just went through. We're going to start with the front forks, and we're going to set the sag to start off with. Some forks, the manual comes with a table which shows you your weight, the travel of your forks, and how much air pressure you should be running. If yours doesn't, or you can't find this, you can set it up with a tape measure. The sag needs to be between 15 to 20% on your front forks, meaning that mine are 170 millimeters of travel. 20% of that is 34, so I need 34 millimeters of sag with all my riding equipment on. To find this, what you do is you get your O-ring and put it onto the dust wiper, set your compression to open, and then with your riding gear you stand over the bike. You don't push the forks down, you just load them up with your riding gear, feet off the ground. You then come off the bike, grab your tape measure, and then measure between the O-ring and the dust wiper to see how much travel there is. If it's like 40%, so say it was 50 millimeters, then you're going to need to make them stiffer by applying air. If it was 10%, then you need to let some air out, and it's just trial and error to find between 15 and 20% and have the perfect sag setting. To set the sag on the rear is exactly the same process. However, the front we had 15 to 20 mil, on the rear we want 20 to 25 millimeters. Adjust this, get it dialed in using your air valve and air pressures. Once you've got both sag settings dialed in, we're then going to sort out your suspension's progression. The suspension progression is the amount of travel that is used up when you push into the suspension as hard as you can on the ground without the wheels coming off the ground. It should be about 80% of your travel used up in the front fork and 90% in the rear, meaning that the front of mine is about 136 millimeters and the rear is about 58 millimeters. We adjust the progression on the front forks by using the compression dials. When they are turned fully clockwise, that means that they are closed, meaning the suspension is at its firmest. However, anti-clockwise means it's open, meaning that that setting is at its softest. What we have to do is fine tune and dial this using the clicks until we're using up that 80% of the travel when bouncing without the wheels coming off the ground. The rear shock only has 3 compression settings, so adjust this until you're using 90% of the rear travel. However, just remember this is only a base setting and can be and should be adjusted for each different specific trail or type of riding that you're doing. If you're struggling to achieve your 80% in the front fork and 90% in the rear shock, then what you can do is add or remove volume spacers. By removing them is going to make the fork softer, by adding them is going to make the fork or the shock stiffer. Alternatively, what you could do is compromise your sag setting, so depending on what you need, add or remove air to stiffen or soften your shock or fork up. Final adjustment that we're going to make to your suspension is the rebound setting, and this is actually determined by the air pressure that you're using, so you can check your manual because they might have a guide in there for your fork and for the air pressure you've got. It will tell you how many clicks you need. If you don't have that, there's a simple way that we can do it. What you need to do is set your rebound to the slowest setting, and then you're going to grab the handlebars and push down about a quarter of the travel that the suspension has, and then you're just going to let go and let it spring up. Then what you need to do is turn it one click and do this, repeat this process until your front wheel starts coming up off the ground. When you're at that point, the rebound is too quick, and what we're trying to achieve is the fastest rebound without the wheel coming off the ground. Once you achieve that, that's your perfect rebound setting. Adjusting the rebound in the rear shock, what you need to do this is a small drop like a curb, and you need to sit down rolling off of it very slowly. Set the rebound to its slowest position, and as you go off the drop, look at the shock. What it will do is it will compress and it will return to the sag position very slowly. What we want to do then is turn it up a click, and what we're trying to achieve, the perfect sag setting on the rear, is for it to compress, and when it returns to go over the sag position, then back. When we find this, that's when we have the perfect setting. Again, it's trial and error, just keeping an eye on it and seeing what feels good for you as well. So there we have it. You now know what all your adjustments are in your suspension, you know how to adjust it, you know what kind of setting to aim for each style of riding, and you should have a fairly decent, solid base setting on your bike which feels good. It will improve your riding, it will make a difference, and it will feel so much better. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, leave some comments below. If you have any more questions, just put them below because I will reply, and I will see you guys in the next one.